right, we have a quorum, and I can actually start the meeting, and I can read what I'm supposed to do. So that will be more efficient. Okay. And Francis, you'll look out for Sue?
Yeah, I'll keep an eye out.
Okay, thank you. As a preliminary matter, this is Wendy Heiger-Bernays, Chair of the Lexington Board of Health. Permit me to confirm that all board members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Dr. Bert Perlmutter.
Here.
Mr. J. Okay, Mr. J. Flynn.
Present.
Okay, and the others are getting on. So we do have a quorum. Participants from the staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Co-interim health directors, David Nealon.
He's muted.
David. Okay, we'll start with Casey Mellon.
I'm here.
Great, thank you. And Alicia McCartan.
Present.
Thank you. Good day. The time is now 6:06 on September 8th, 2020. I call this open meeting of the Board of Health in the town of Lexington, Massachusetts to order. Please note that this meeting is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth with the outbreak of COVID-19. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as reasonable public access is afforded to the public and they can follow along with the deliberation of the meeting. For this meeting, the Board of Health is convening by video conference via Zoom, as posted on the town's website identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other people may be able to see you, and please take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Further, this evening's meeting is being taped by LexMedia for future on-demand viewing. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website, unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. The materials will also be shared when appropriate via the screen sharing from our executive clerk, unless indicated otherwise. Before we turn to the first items on the agenda, please permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I'll introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, then I, as chair, will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in discussions with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, and we will have item later on in the evening, the chair will afford public comment as follows. The chair will first ask if members of the public wish to speak publicly. Residents that have dialed in by phone should press *9 on their phone. For residents that have connected through the Zoom application, please click on the raise hand button. Once the chair has a list of all public commentators, each resident will be recognized by the chair. They will be asked to identify themselves by names and addresses, and each commentator will be limited to 3 minutes for any comments. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. And I welcome Sue Wolf-Fordham to the meeting as well. It's good to see you, Sue. Okay, so for this evening, our first item on the agenda is going to be presented by Attorney Cheryl Sabara, Executive Director, yes, of the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards. She'll be speaking about local public health, legal authority for local boards of health with attention to during COVID-19 pandemic. So Cheryl's going to share her screen and will be presenting her slides. And I think Francis enabled that.
Cheryl's muted.
Yes. Cheryl?
I'm unmuted.
You're
okay,
unmuted.
so I would imagine I just click the share screen. Nope, this says host disabled participants.
Okay, so you know, I can share the screen and you want me to do that?
Sure, and then I'll just do the next slide.
Okay, hold on. Sorry, okay. Now I have the, okay. It's going to take me a sec here. Put this over here. This is the two screen business. Okay. Okay, you cannot see my, excuse me. Let me share my screen. Oh, only host. Okay. Sorry about this. Okay, great. It does, Francis, it's not allowing me to share my screen.
I just made you I made you the head host. So
You did
Yeah.
indeed, but it does not allow me. So, Cheryl, are you able to share your screen?
That's what I'm trying to look at. Wait a minute, it looks like I can.
Okay, because I can't now.
I just have to find the file. Okay. Okay, can everyone see this?
No.
No. Okay.
Now it looks like I can share it. Shall I do it?
Sure.
Okay, let's see if I can get this done now.
Yep, you've got it.
I got it. Okay, so we'll play from current slide. Okay, what do you see? See the regular slideshow, or do you see? You good?
I'm fine.
Okay, so all you see is one slide, not the whole deck.
I see the whole deck,
Oh,
but that's okay.
no, it's not okay.
How about just use slideshow?
It's coming. Something's happening.
Good.
Or maybe.
So I can start.
Okay.
Here we go.
I'll just.
There we go.
So what I'm going to try to do this evening, and hopefully I will not take a long time to do this, is to just review just sort of a refresher course on what the legal authority of local boards of health are in Massachusetts, and then talk a little bit about how COVID fits into the legal authority. So in the United States, the federal government really just sets minimum standards for public health. They leave, next slide please, they leave the bulk of the legal authority to protect public health to the states and to the local governments, especially in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, what happened is that in the state legislature basically delegated their authority to make reasonable public health regulations to local boards of health pursuant to Chapter 111, Section 31. So that's what gives local boards of health the authority to enact local laws. And what some people don't understand, and it's understandable that they don't understand it, is that public health is actually encompassed within the police power of the state and the local government. So the police power is the power to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the residents of Massachusetts. So, you know, we when we think of police power, we think of police and maybe fire. We don't normally think of public health, but it actually is part of the police power granted to the states. Police power, it remains with the states, and in Massachusetts, a lot of that has been delegated to local boards of health. And this is it's a widely accepted function of government to protect public health, even when you sometimes are abridging on a person's individual freedom. For instance, we require in Massachusetts that folks that ride motorcycles have to wear a helmet. That's individual behavior that we are regulating pursuant to our legal authority to protect public health. And when it comes to the right to engage in business, case law is very clear, not only in Massachusetts, but everywhere, that the right to engage in business has to yield to the paramount right of government to protect the public health by any rational means. Next slide, please. So as I said, in Massachusetts, the state legislature delegated a lot of its legal authority to local boards of health. So that can look, it can look different. Sometimes it's the sharing of power. Sometimes it's delegating to locals the primary enforcing authority. For instance, the smoke-free workplace law specifically delegates the authority to enforce that law to the local boards of health. Boards do have the authority to strengthen a state public health law, and they also have the authority to regulate. And I'm just going to point out now that I'm talking about local board of health authority. I'm not talking about health agents. I'm not talking about any other municipal department. I'm talking about the local board of health itself. And my understanding in Lexington is that the Lexington board is appointed by the town manager with the approval of the Board of Selectmen. So you are the official Board of Health, and the authority from the state was delegated to you as Board of Health members, not to anyone else. You would have to delegate your authority to your health agents. Okay, next slide. Next slide.
Yep, it's going.
Okay, great. So in addition to Section 31, which gives you the general regulatory authority to enact local laws, and public health regulations stand on the same footing as a town bylaw, a state law, a state regulation. It is a local law. Now, in addition to the Thank you. In addition to the general regulatory authority, there is specific authority in other sections of Chapter 111 that address specific legal authority that boards of health have. The most important one right now for the purposes of COVID-19 is really the nuisance law, Chapter 122. We're going to talk about that a little more. You also have the authority to address sanitary code, housing code. Your list of duties and obligations is pretty broad, as you'll see in another slide. Next one, please.
It's coming.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and if you look at case law in Massachusetts, and in Massachusetts, there's case law and there's statutory law, and there's regulatory law, but the Supreme Judicial Court is the highest court in Massachusetts, and they have consistently upheld the Board of Health authority to enact health regulations. Here are just some of the cases that go through some of the language that the SJC has afforded boards of health. The court will only strike a Board of Health regulation when the challenger proves that there's an absence of any conceivable ground upon which the law would be upheld. The law needs to be reasonable, but the court is not going to substitute its judgment for the judgment of the local Board of Health. All rational presumptions are made in favor of the validity of the local law that the Board of Health enacted. Next slide.
Coming.
I know. So here was a really interesting case that I actually was a part of. It happened after the smoke-free workplace law went into effect. When the smoke-free workplace law went into effect, the state law exempted private clubs and then had a couple of other exemptions to it. What was happening in ATHOL was that a lot of private clubs started advertising that they were open to the public. Come on down, the drinks are cheaper than they are in bars. We can make you a member for one day. So they were taking a lot of business away from the bars in the town. So I remember the health director calling me and saying, you know, the bars are all complaining, what should I do? And I said, well, if these private clubs are acting like public bars, that's a violation of the state law, because the state law clearly says they cannot be open to the public if they're going to permit smoking. So I said, just go in and ticket them and say they're violating the state law. So that's what the Board of Health did for a while. They went in and ticketed, and the private clubs just tore up the tickets because they really didn't care, and they were making so much money because they were offering drinks for so little. So then they asked me, well, what can we do next? And I said, well, you can pass a regulation that's stricter than the state law, and you can prohibit smoking in all private clubs. So they did that, and they were sued by the private clubs, and it went to the SJC, and the SJC, the Supreme Judicial Court, held that the Board of Health had passed a reasonable health regulation, that the focus of public health is to protect the health of every member of the community. It doesn't matter if the place is called private. It doesn't matter what the place is called. It doesn't matter where the geography is or where the location is. The job of the Board of Health is to protect local public health. And we went through the helmet example. This was sort of funny. When the attorney for the private clubs was arguing before the Supreme Judicial Court, one of the justices asked him, well, what about smoke detectors? I mean, we require smoke detectors. That's individual behavior in someone's house. It's a private residence. You have to have a smoke detector. So the attorney said, well, you know, doesn't really, first of all, that's not enforced except when you're buying a home. So it doesn't really matter because nobody enforces it. And number two, it's really there to protect members of the general public who come into the house. So contrary to what we all thought, was that the smoke detector was there in case there was a fire in the middle of the night and we were asleep so we could get ourselves and our kids and our pets or whatever out of the house. It really was there just to protect guests that came into the house. That's just, I think, an interesting aside. Next slide. So nuisance, and this is really important for COVID-19. And the only entity that has the legal authority to determine what is a nuisance and to act on that determination is the local Board of Health. And what the law requires is that the board examine into all nuisances, sources of filth, causes of sickness, or anything that may cause injury to the public health. So, you know, COVID-19 is certainly something that may cause injury to the public health. It's a highly contagious, communicable disease. So here is a statute that affords boards of health broad discretion. And when we run into cases where we either have an establishment that's not complying with the mandatory safety standards to such a degree that it is presenting serious public health issues, and I can think of one example where we had a water slide park that was open, even though water slides were not allowed to be open until phase 4, which is nowhere near. We can't see where phase 4 is yet. They were operating in violation of that, or the governor's order. And in addition, they were creating a public health nuisance because there were so many people there so close together that the nuisance statute was something that came into play there. Also, when we're looking now at these private gatherings that are taking place either on college campuses or private parties, weddings like the one Wendy was mentioning in Maine, you know, that can rise to the level of a public health nuisance in addition to being a violation of gathering orders, facial mask orders, etc. And the difference, the importance of that is that the Board of Health has the authority to issue a cease and desist order and shut the party or the event down. And the fees are as high as $1,000 an incident instead of the $500, which is the gathering order violation fine and the facial mask fine. Next slide, please. So we're just going to quickly, this really, I don't think is a big issue in Lexington, but generally acceptable farming procedures are not considered by law nuisances. If someone wants to have a BLT, someone somewhere is going to have to smell a pig. So generally accepted farming procedures are not considered by law nuisances. Next slide. Noisome trade is another area where boards of health have a lot of legal authority. And what this means is that if you have some sort of a trade or a business that's coming into town that may result in a nuisance or be injurious to someone's property, then the Board of Health can either not allow it to come in or give it a site assignment so that it can only be it can only be established in certain areas of the town. An example of this would be a body shop coming in where you wouldn't necessarily want it in a neighborhood, but there may be some areas that are appropriate for it. Mike Hugo, my colleague, has some other examples if we have time later on. So this is another legal authority that's only given to local boards of health. Next slide. So these are the inspections that are done. And again, these inspections are done pursuant to the legal authority of local boards of health. So the Board of Health can delegate agents to do work for them, but they have to delegate that person to be an agent of the Board of Health. The law that requires this is Chapter 111, Section 30. And COVID-19, all of the governor's orders say that this shall be enforced by the Board of Health or its duly authorized agent pursuant to Chapter 111, Section 30. And what we recommend at MAHB is that you annually would delegate certain individuals to be your agent, and that delegation is clearly in the minutes of the open meeting where that has been done. So your health inspector or your health director, public health nurse, whoever is operating under the legal authority of the Board of Health when they're doing inspections. Okay, next slide. And this is just interesting. It's daunting and a little frightening, but DPH put together a manual of all of the Board of Health statutory requirements and regulatory requirements. MAHB updated it in 2016. There are additional laws that have gone into effect, laws and regulations that have created more duties and obligations since 2016, but it has not been updated. So here you will see in the next two slides what these statutory applications actually are. And just let's go back. One, you'll see nuisance, which is very relevant to COVID-19. And then you will see on the previous slide, disease prevention and control. And that is where all of the COVID work that boards of health are doing, all the clinical work that they're doing is in that disease prevention and control part 3 of the manual. And in addition to isolation and quarantine and surveillance, there's also now a mandatory requirement for flu vaccines for anyone, I think it's under the age of 30. That's another obligation that local boards of health have been given. Next slide. Next slide. So in a nutshell, some of the more common obligation are listed here. I just talked about them all. In addition, there is also a new tobacco state law that prohibits selling all flavored tobacco products, including menthol, mint, and wintergreen, everywhere in the state except in smoking bars for on-site consumption only. And I don't think Lexington has a smoking bar. So in Lexington, you should not be seeing any flavored tobacco products anywhere in the town. Next slide. So code inspections, this really does become important. And again, the legal authority comes from the Board of Health, regardless of who does the inspection, but whoever does it has to be delegated by the Board of Health. In some cases, and we'll talk about this in a minute, this is an extremely important duty of the Board of Health. If you just look at how many people actually become ill annually from foodborne illnesses, this is an extremely important code that boards of health are to enforce. Now, and boards can also actually enact stronger food protection regulations if they see fit. Now, some of these inspections, let's go on to the next slide and I'll talk. Some of these inspections are done through inspectional services and not directly through boards of health. They're done in larger municipalities. Sometimes, like in Boston, they'll have inspectional services and health department inspectional services. However, the only way that really works, especially when you're looking at housing inspections and food inspections, is there has to be really good communication between whoever's doing the inspection and the Board of Health. Frequently, and I know this has happened in Framingham, the Framingham Board of Health has not, there were times in the past where they would not get these inspection reports from restaurants, and therefore they could not issue correction orders because they didn't know that there were violations of certain sections of the food code. That's not good, and that's not how it should work. And it's critical for food inspections, and it's also critical for housing code inspections, because if you have a housing inspection, frequently a health department inspector who's trained in public health may be doing a housing inspection, and when he or she is doing that inspection, they may observe other public health issues and other unsafe conditions that are not necessarily housing code issues, but maybe issues with minors that either aren't in school or appear to be unhealthy. They may see hoarding issues that need to be addressed, or other unsafe conditions. And then the other challenge with having inspections not within the health department itself and under the purview of the local Board of Health is that if you see a violation of a food code or a housing code and it's not brought to the attention of the Board of Health, then the Board of Health can't issue other orders that may be important. There may be a nuisance order that needs to be issued, or another kind of health order that needs to be issued. Next slide, please. So there are certain unique public health enforcement strategies that inspectional services don't have the ability or the authority to use, especially if they haven't been delegated agents of the Board of Health. So if inspection is going to be separated into inspectional services and out of the Board of Health, then you want to make sure that there's plenty of communication between the Board of Health and inspectional services, and that immediate public health threats are identified by these inspectors and reported to the Board of Health. And that, especially in housing, you may have a situation where you've got a condemnation on your hands and you may not be aware of it. Next slide. Oh, so that's the last slide, which I'm sure you're very pleased about. So if there are any questions, Wendy, I'm going to turn it back over to you as chair.
Sure. Thank you very much, Cheryl. That was very informative, particularly since we don't have the annual training, I think, the MAHB annual training, and it's always good for us to hear how things are going. I have a couple of questions. One question, you had mentioned that the Board of Health either might or should annually assign authority to its agents to carry out legal actions. In the
Yes.
case of Lexington, for example, if the town manager hires the agents and the Board of Health, the Board of Health doesn't hire the agents, what's the proper or proper route, I think, to either evaluate, I think, the inspections, evaluate the decisions that are being made? Is there an obligation for all inspections to be made visible in writing to the board? Sort of what are the steps that need to get taken so that the board can actually have sort of confidence that its authority and its interpretation of the laws are being done according to code?
I think I can, if you want to give me 1 second, Cheryl, before you.
Sure.
Okay, so I think your question actually raises about 9 different questions, Wendy, but the important thing to know is that regardless of who hires your health agents, they report directly to you, and Cheryl will give you all the statutory on that in a second. But what's important is that as the Board of Health, you have the authority to close restaurants, you have the authority to order inspections, you have the authority to bring a nuisance action, and you do that usually through your agent. And what we did in Framingham was we required our health agent to give us a monthly, and it still goes on to this day, that we get a monthly report from the health agent on all of the restaurants and any other entities in town that are failing inspections. And that way we know ahead of time, because we can see a restaurant starting to go bad before it actually does. And it's up to the board then to enforce the orders against the business establishment. And then Cheryl, if you want to.
Sure, and again, as Mike said, you know, there are charters that give the hiring authority to the town manager. That's, you know, we see that a lot, but that doesn't absolve anyone of Chapter 111, Section 30, which is the law that states that agents, that the board has to delegate its authority for an agent in order for that activity of that agent, that inspector, or whatever that inspector is doing, is blessed, for lack of a better term, by the board. So if you're not delegating that authority to your agents are not working pursuant to Board of Health authority. This became a real problem many, many years ago, and this is why we now suggest that standard operating procedure merits that agents be appointed annually, because we had a case in Southeastern Mass where catering, it was a really, really hot day in July, and a catering truck van went under a bridge that it didn't fit under, and had a 1-vehicle accident. And as a result of that accident, they were on their way to a catering job. And as a result of that accident, there was all sorts of insulation that started going into the raw meat and all of the raw food that was going to be put on the barbecue. And the agent for this town was on vacation and had delegated, and the Board of Health had delegated the authority to a neighboring agent, but that agent wasn't available. It was a Sunday. So one of the Board of Health members, and again, it was a Sunday, you know, 100 degrees out, there's a 5-member board. He was able to get one other member of the board to go to the accident scene because the police called because there was food involved. And the Board of Health member called the owner of the catering business and said, listen, we can't let you serve this food. We've got to get rid of it. And the catering agent said, well, can I at least bring another truck? And they said, no, that'll take you an hour. That's too long. This food is out with no refrigeration and it's too dangerous. So they ordered that the food be disposed of. And the catering truck owner questioned the authority of the local Board of Health to do that by citing a statute that said it's only the agent of the Board of Health that can order to destroy the property, not the local Board of Health members, which was completely ridiculous and against common sense. And I sent them a letter, and the issue was resolved and went away. The board, they didn't have a quorum when they made that decision, so they scheduled an emergency meeting within 48 hours, and the whole board ratified the decision of the 2 members, but it wasn't the agent that had the legal authority to make that decision. It was the Board of Health. So ever since then, we have strongly suggested that you have a public meeting where you delegate your staff as agents of the Board of Health. Otherwise, what they're doing is not pursuant to your legal authority.
And right now, in the time of COVID, you should consider who your agents should be. I know that right now we have all of these enforcement powers that we share with our police and with DLS and with DPH, and I know that some boards of health are appointing the police chief to be an agent of the Board of Health, so that there's no question as to whether the police have jurisdiction when they're called by the Board of Health or the health agent to come in and help out with, say there's a masking issue there's a big party going on, and that happened as recently as this past weekend all over the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So it might behoove you to actually think about who you want to have as your agents. When we had our issue in Framingham, where we had a town manager who was hyperactive and decided to let our staff go to the inspectional services within the building department, and we had a building commissioner who told the inspectors, you may not report to the Board of Health. You shall not report to the Board of Health. You report to me, and if I think it's an issue for them, I'll take it to them. And that resulted, actually, Cheryl, I think that we were probably the only board that ever did this in Massachusetts, but we actually took an affirmative vote that our building commissioner was not an agent of the Board of Health. And what that did was it created a disconnect where we weren't allowed to talk to our own health inspectors about restaurants, and the Framingham restaurants went, they went uninspected for a period of 8 months while we had this battle in front of the Board of Selectmen, who was totally protective of the town manager. And it took the convening of a town meeting and a 17-page letter that I shared with the selectmen that I was going to deliver to town meeting that night for us to settle it. So the issue of agency for the Board of Health it can be a very sticky issue, and it requires really, requires a whole effort of the town, everyone from the town manager right on down to the health inspectors all being on the same page with the board, and the board knowing what its authority is. And the authority of the board simply is that you get to direct what goes on for public health in your town. Back to Cheryl.
No, just any questions?
Yeah, this is great. Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you, Mike. I won't take all the time. I will go around and ask other board members if they have questions. First, Sue Wolfordham.
Sure. I had a couple questions about nuisance. I understand from what you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, nuisance applies to public events and private events. Does nuisance apply to church services or other house of worship services? And does it apply to things like outside groups that come in and want to use town property for an event, either building or land?
Yes, is the short answer. The longer answer is it's within your discretion to determine whether something rises to the level of a public health nuisance.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm saying that is because I'm sure, well, I don't know whether you as a board have been involved in this, because I don't know how close you work with your agents, but in cases where boards of health work closely with their agents, you are going to sometimes be sort of sucked into an event between two neighbors that's been going on for 150 years about where a fence is placed and whether it's a spike fence or not, or, you know, a family, you know, a Montague and Capulet situation. You know, there are always going to be those situations where, you know, your gut tells you this isn't rising to the level of a public health threat, but there may be, excuse me, there may be a private cause of action that those two feuding individuals could bring themselves in either district or superior court, but that it wouldn't rise to the level. So that really is a judgment call that you make. Is this a real immediate threat to public health, or is it not? It's your gut that tells you that. And again, a court is not going to substitute its judgment for the judgment of the Board of Health, unless you're intentionally violating someone's constitutional rights or civil rights.
Susan, there's almost no instance whatsoever in anything that would offend your senses as a member of a Board of Health that you cannot apply the nuisance statute to. There's almost nothing that can get away from that. When you read the statute, it says that Board of Health, that's you, shall examine into all nuisances, blah, 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 and causes of sickness within its town, and shall destroy, remove, or prevent the same as the case may require, and shall make regulations for the public health and safety relative thereto. So under any situation, today a question was asked about a school, and I don't know if people were on the call this afternoon, but somebody asked, what happens in a school when there's no windows in a room that they're going to put the kids into, and they want to use these ventilation machines in the room? If in the judgment of the Board of Health, that's creating a situation that increases the danger of illness to those kids, you can step in as the Board of Health, and should step in as a Board of Health, and say that this constitutes a nuisance because you are creating a situation where illness can result. And that's a public health, that's the definition right out of the statute of what a public health nuisance is. And there's almost nothing that you'll be confronted with that you can't go to the nuisance statute for. We closed down what were called body works establishments in Framingham under a nuisance statute. And what they were really doing is they were doing sexual slavery. They had human trafficking going on in these 18 establishments that we closed down in one day with the nuisance enforcement. Anything, it applies to anything.
Can I ask a
Yes, please do.
So I'm trying to understand a little bit more about the process and if nuisance can be declared before the event occurs. So let's say a team from another town wants to use a playing field in Lexington. And for example, during COVID, and let's say the players aren't going to be separate, they're not going to be wearing masks for whatever reason, does the Board of Health need to wait till the game begins or till the game ends? Or can the Board of Health say, if you choose to play the game this way, this is going to be a nuisance and we recommend you take the following steps, or something like that, meaning in advance of the event occurring.
Welcome to Cheryl's life. Go ahead, Cheryl. Tell us.
Yeah, the answer to the question is yes, because you can, a nuisance is something that may cause sickness. Now, I've always said for the past 25 years or more since I've been doing this, is that local boards of health are about compliance, not punishment. We're not there to issue willy-nilly cease and desist orders all over the place. We're there to get compliance, and we're there to protect the public health. So what I hope would happen in a case like that would be whatever the other town is that's involved, that the Board of Health, either through its agent, and you would know about this, or through one of the members, would contact the Board of Health in the other town and work this out in a way that would protect public health. That would be, in my opinion, that would be the goal. And now again, I preface this by saying, we are only providing legal education and technical assistance to Lexington. Lexington has a town attorney. That town attorney is the only attorney that can provide legal advice to Lexington. So this is all for educational purposes only. The buck stops with your attorney to determine whether you could do that or not do that. I mean, the buck stops with that attorney for everything that we've said. Whatever we've said, you can't rely on as legal advice, only as legal education.
Understood. What was in my head was the in advance, as opposed to wait for the first pitch of the ball game and then take action. So if the Board of Health can take action in advance, does that mean if someone applies to the town to have that fictional baseball game, that the Board of Health should review that decision before the baseball game occurs, before the permission is given? Just explain.
I think I understand what you're saying, and there are mandatory safety standards for youth sports and adult sports now because of COVID, and they're based on a very strategic reopening plan with 4 phases. We're now in phase 3, step 1. I believe it's no, it's not EEC. It's the Office of Environmental and Energy or whatever that does EEA that does most of the sports work. You can go to their website or the Department of Labor standards and see what the guidance is. And these are mandatory safety standards for these types of athletic events. If these athletic events are taking place or are planned to take place in a way that's in violation of the COVID, the COVID mandatory standards, then they're already, they're illegal. They can't. So you cannot play a sport now unless you're doing it pursuant to the safety standards that have been promulgated. So if someone is permitting that, they're permitting it. If what you're saying, if you go through this, they're not doing it the way they're supposed to do it. Then they're doing it in violation of the law.
Thank you.
Okay.
And if you have questions about that, Michael Flanagan from the Department of Labor Standards, who I think you're familiar with, is a really good person to contact about that. And he can, depending on, I think this is a Gerben issue, isn't it, Mike? I think that's the name of the sports guy.
Yes, Gerben, and I can never pronounce his last name, but yes.
And just to reassure you, I was trying to think of a hypothetical. I do not know of any wrong sports situation. I was trying to get where in the timeline the Board of Health would be notified or their opinion would be sought. And that's that's what I was thinking about. Not at all a specific sporting
Right.
event. Thank you for the information.
I would think that your park and recreation department would be getting a request for a field permit or something, and that you should be putting them on notice that when that happens, they should let you know so that you can take a look at it. Because
So I'm going to
expensive.
stop you right there, Mike, because it does. I mean, the recreation department does amazing work, and they are well aware of the guidelines and the standards. But I'd like to understand more carefully or more closely the process. So somebody requests a permit for something, or an event, or even the recreation department is going to go ahead and plan something. What should be the process for either review by the Board of Health or review by the agents of the Board of Health? How much time should be given so that the health agents can do their work in a calm, professional manner? And at what point should the board be, should there be communication with the board regarding these decisions or these requests?
Thank you, Wendy. You've said much more clearly what I was trying to get at. Thank you.
Well, if you look at all of the governor's orders, and I think he's on number 48 now, or I'm not sure what number he's on, they all say this order shall be enforced by the Board of Health or its agent pursuant to 111 Section 30. So what standard operating procedure from my perspective, having been working on COVID since March, is that it's very common that other municipal departments contact the Board of Health because they are aware of the Board of Health's integral role, not just in enforcement, but also in, case identification, contact tracing, all of the clinical pieces of it as well. So they just, as a matter of course, contact the Board of Health before they do anything else. That has been what I have seen since we've started this COVID work, which was in March. And because, this is new, it's a pandemic, we have not had to regulate sporting events the way we're doing, or we have stay-at-home advisories and all of that. But it has always been, the governor has stated, sometimes to my chagrin, because there is just too much on boards of health plates, that the board's responsible. So if the board's responsible and these things are happening that are not legal, that are not in compliance with the mandatory safety guidance, and something happens because they're not in compliance with the safety guidance, I wouldn't want to be in that position if I were a city or town. Now, again, there's a lot of liability protection, but there's a reason why this guidance was issued, and there's a reason why it was issued. There's a reason why social distancing is important. There's a reason why you can't play football. Youth cannot play football unless it's tag football. They can't play basketball under most circumstances. There's a reason for all of that, for the high impact, high risk sports. So if these things are happening in a municipality in violation of an order, we've got a problem.
Okay,
Also,
so
as a practical matter, if you have a team coming from another town, that's the expensive proposition. And I would think that they want to hear from the Board of Health ahead of time. Don't come because you're not going to be able to play.
Right. I think the issue here is about process again, is about, excuse me, about when does the Board of Health and its agents need to see documentation that the event or the situation is compliant with the governor's rules, guidelines. And, you know, I am concerned because nobody can keep up with this, right? And there needs to be, at some point, either the Board of Health, if it doesn't see what's going on, has to say, you're doing this and we haven't seen, we haven't been able to review. And so at that point, do we simply say, go at it, Lexington, you're on your own, or what? I mean, what?
I mean, this is begging the comments and advice from your town council. I mean, this is clearly an issue that neither Mike nor I should be advising you on. There are certain orders that boards can issue before an event happens pursuant to their own authority, pursuant to Chapter 111, Section 122, the nuisance statute. You know, you can issue cease and desist orders before something happens. Say it can't happen or you'll be violating this order. But again, this is something that town council really needs to weigh in on. I think what you're talking about is, are there proactive ways to prevent things from happening that you're concerned are endangering public health and or in violation of mandatory safety standards? I think that's what your question is, and that's a question for your town council.
Okay, I do have one question, then I'll keep going. I'm sorry. Did you say that the Board of Health can enact regulations that are stronger than state law?
Yes, as long as they don't conflict.
Okay.
And courts have held consistently that stronger regulations don't conflict, they augment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Flynn, you have a question?
Well, I think you've done well in asking the questions here. Surely this whole COVID-19 pandemic situation and the state regulations has created great confusion where everybody is responsible for the reopening plans. But these plans are pouring out without effective Board of Health review. Just the concern that I have here. And that I'm most concerned that the citizens of Lexington are looking to the Board of Health to see that there is this concurrence and consistency with the state laws. But I believe I get the message that in the particulars, we probably have to go to town council to what regulations or what directives we may be able to put out in regard to this. I think I have that right. So I'm all set otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Perlmutter.
The topic has been covered now in great detail. And I don't think I have anything to add in the line of questions because of our concerns about decisions being made about the reopening process and are not being brought in on it until after the fact. Or maybe at the last minute when they say, well, we're ready to roll out this event. They don't ask our opinion. They say, we just need the Board of Health approval. And at that point, is there anything we can do? Other than say, per regulation, we don't approve, but then we have to have a reason for not approving. Maybe if we had time to review it, we would approve. Or can we legally say, we need 2 weeks to review this.
Or 48 hours.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, that's
Okay.
my question, is when, because this is happening very fast. Everybody wants to reopen as quickly as possible. We certainly were consulted at length by the education, the school board in Lexington, as well as the superintendent. But there are other events, and some of them are those from the recreation department, where they're ready to roll. And then they say, we want your approval. But how do we approve of it when we were not involved in the process? And what can we do to get involved? And are we in a position legally to say, we can't make a decision for 2 days, 3 days, whatever, when they say, but we've got it scheduled for Monday? You know, we have a legal leg to stand on within the statute to say we need time to review it.
Okay.
Some situations you may want to talk to Mike Flanagan about in some certain circumstances. Division of Labor Standards. They have an awful lot to say about the suitability of certain events occurring. And I think if it's an event that you're concerned with, I would certainly not hesitate to talk to Michael Flanagan. Do you agree with that, Cheryl?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
It's really trying to fit it into what the governor's orders are about reopening and whether these are exceeding the state's official recommendations. And we need to look at it. And in order to look at it, we need to be given, more than instant notice. We want your approval now.
So I think that, Bert, with all due, I think this is a process issue and not so much a legal issue that we were going to need to deal with.
Okay.
But I think, no, I know this. But I think we're hearing from both Cheryl and Mike what the law says about what the governor says and doesn't say and who has to approve. And I think it's figuring out how this can become more functional. I'm not cutting you off. I'm just seeing Dr. Geller.
No, that was the only thing that
No, thank you. I mean, that's it. That's part of that there's no question. Dr. Geller, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Yeah, I don't really have any questions. I just find all this information extremely helpful and educational to give us more insight, especially during these trying times about where things lie for us and how we approach things correctly. So I just think this is valuable to me, and I think the whole board. I think the presenters very much for this.
I don't think Dr. Geller, unfortunately, ever made it to one of the annual events, the trainings. So this is great. No, yes. It's not a ding. It's really good to hear this.
That'd be good.
If it was a ding, I'll take it too. So it's all good.
No.
I think we're going to be doing some actually online this year. So
that's great.
Yeah, we're working on that right now.
That's great. Anybody else on the board have any questions about legal aspects, about any of the materials that Cheryl presented and Mike discussed? Sue?
This is not, I don't know if this is a legal question or not. I tried looking on your website, but I was unable to find, and maybe it doesn't exist, like a chart that says in Northampton, here's what public health looks like, here's how it's structured, and in Worcester, like a comparison chart that talks about structure and number of personnel in the Office of Health. Does that kind of thing exist?
You are ahead of us. That is what the Special Commission on Local and Regional Health has been working on since 2016. We did come up with a report that went through in great detail, and I would highly recommend, if you're interested in public health infrastructure, to look at that report. It looked at the status of local health in Massachusetts and came up with some recommendations on how to improve it, how to make it more equitable. The members of that commission were very, very diverse. We had the Mass Municipal Association on that commission. We had the Mass Taxpayers Association. We had the Hospital Association. We had some legislators. And I mean, it was a commission made up of folks that understood public health and that had never really thought about public health. And we spent a few years coming up with a report that was released in the summer of 2019 that goes through some of the things, Susan, that you are mentioning. What should a good public health department look like? What should be its size? What should be the foundational public health services that it offers? How qualified, what should be the qualifications of the workforce? Can they meet even the minimum mandatory standards in the manual that you saw, about an hour ago? So that report is very informative, and it does the best we can do now of looking at what we have out there.
Thank you.
And that's this, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Any questions by Casey or Alicia or David?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, interesting enough,
Do you
late
want to
last...
introduce yourself, Casey?
Hello, my name is Casey Mellon. I'm a relatively new health agent, and I'll be kind of co-running the department for until we just decide with the future health director and what have you. I started back in May. As far as the the events coming, I think late last week I sent a suggestion out to Carrie at the time, and I brought it up this morning, and we've actually started working on compiling, it's not a permit application, it's more of an application or a form that when somebody comes to the town and says, we want to rent this field, or we're looking to do that we can just give them this information with the, a series of questions, the basic social distancing, sanitation, signage, what have you, and they can fill, before they say, well, we want to do this, so this is what we're looking to do, they fill this out, they look at the websites that we provide them that have all the guidance, and then they kind of come to us with more specific information on what they're exactly doing and how they will comply, because that has been a little bit of an issue. We are getting something maybe from the Boy Scouts or something like this, and it wasn't such an issue in the summer, but it seems like the fall, it seems like people are getting more anxious to get going.
Yeah.
And I've been, I see an email here and there. So this is something that I've noticed too, and would like to tighten up. And I think that might be a decent start, at least, so when they come to the town and say, we want to use this field on, October 1st for this or that activity. It's like, fine, here's a COVID related application. Again, they don't pay anything or anything, but they fill it out. They they answer the questions. And at a minimum, it puts it on them to do some research, because sometimes they're looking for us to do, where do you find that? It's like, well, here's the link, do a little work on it first and bring it to us, and then we can see how competent in it or what have you and take it from there. But it's definitely something that could use some tightening up. I do agree. So that was my thoughts on the events that are happening and coming to the health department in the town.
Thank you, Casey.
Yeah, I mean, businesses have to self-certify that
Yeah.
they have complied with all of this. So you're talking.
I'm talking more
again,
about events. You know,
right. From
yeah,
my
I'm pretty
experience, most of the event applicants demonstrate to cities and towns that they can meet the requirements.
Yeah, and I think one of the and like I said, it's more of a process issue. It's more
Right,
like
right.
if they get this form and they fill out and answer the questions, we have a nice base to start with. And if it's really, you know, and my experience is when people really sit down and start doing this, they get it. They
Right.
you know they can comply. It's just an issue where, you know, someone will apply and say, hey, we're sort of interested in doing this. Can we do it? And then someone's like, you know, next week we want to do something. And I think just having some sort of organization with you know, even the simple application, or maybe not so simple. I have to kind of look at it, work on that.
I think. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I'm thinking a good thought now. I think we should be reaching out to other municipalities, because I can't imagine that someone hasn't created
Yeah.
such a document. So on one of our calls, I don't know, Casey, if you participate in those calls, but we have calls on Tuesday afternoon at 3 and Friday morning at 9. They're usually either Board of Health members, they're largely Board of Health staff.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah, I've listened to a lot of them. Sometimes I kind of phase in and out doing multitasking, but I am aware of the meetings.
so
it's a little
I
tricky.
can actually ask that question.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And you know, I'm in the speaker's room, so I can make sure it gets answered and see if there are some SOPs out there that people are already using for these.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, being new here, I don't quite have the contacts like I did in my old job. I used to have a mass email to like 10 boards of health. Hey, you guys, what have you done about this or that? I don't have
Just
that
go
yet.
through,
You know,
go through us. I can find that out.
Okay, good.
Great, thank you very much. Okay. What are, I guess, with regard to Casey's point, so what are other municipalities doing?
As I said, most of them are coming to the boards of health for approval.
Okay.
That's what's happening.
Okay.
I bet a lot of other towns are kind of in the same boat. It seemed like there was kind of a lull in the summer. You know, everything was kind of flatlining with the phase 1. You know, I mean, I'm sorry, the phase 3, step 1, and what have you. And now the fall and the school, you know, sort of going back in, it seems to be more of a flurry of activity.
Absolutely.
You know, so there might be a lot of other health departments right now, or boards of health saying, you know, having the same problem, you know.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Melissa Petit from Recreation actually has, I don't know, Melissa, do you have a reply or a question?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you. No, I just, I thank you for reviewing this. And I think because we have a few recreation staff on the call tonight for a later item, and the examples that have been brought up were specific to process around recreation and permits. I just thought it would be a good opportunity to just share that, you know, in terms of the permitting process, it's, pretty tight in terms of how we've been rolling this out from the beginning when the first phase came out all the way up to just last week. So every time the governor does release a new guideline, we clear that. We've been doing that through staff of the health department. We then require each organization to do a one-on-one or a group Zoom meeting with our staff to go over the guidelines and sign off that they adhere to it. And if there is not if we find out that there is some sort of break in the compliance, they receive a warning, which would then have them have their permit revoked. And we've done that with every step of the phased in for the permit process for fields and athletic fields. There's a stop on all special events town-wide right now. So there are no special events being permitted. And if there's something outside of a traditional athletic program, we have been going to the health staff and reviewing that to make sure that our interpretation of those guidelines are in fact what they are, in addition to sharing information from our colleagues, not only in the Northeast region, but statewide and nationally, so that we had some comparisons about what, you know, some of the more liberal versus the more conservative approaches were to reopening. So I feel, you know, if there is going to be a change in process, that would be really important. I would really love the opportunity to be part of those discussions, because the guidelines come out sometimes in 24, 48, 72-hour increments. Organizations are so anxious to get back on into the game or the activity or whatever it may be. Sometimes our public meetings between Recreation Committee and Board of Health would delay that process, and you could lose a whole month of a season to reopen. So I just, if there is going to be change in process and some of these ideas sound great, I just want to, like I did in the spring, please take advantage of us as a staff to be part of that dialogue.
Okay, thank you very much, Melissa. I think that the point is that we have to have the health staff have the time to be able to do this. Are there other questions, or can we let Cheryl and Mike go to their next probably meeting or something else?
Just one more.
Yes, of course, Mike.
No. I mean, I would just have only one more call tonight, so it's wonderful.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time that you spent with us. We have some work to do, and we'll be in touch.
I think just a little, just one word. It's communications.
I think you're right.
Communication across your town.
Yep.
Every board should know it. Every other, right now especially, everybody needs to know everybody else's business, because that's what COVID's all about. Is it's spreading to someone else who let their guard down, and without all of the protections of the Park and Rec department, of your department, of health, of the town manager, everybody, without everybody pulling together and communicating every inch of the way, that's how COVID wins and we don't. So.
Right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
all
you.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to the next agenda item. I don't know how much information we'll have, since the staff haven't had time to, I think, adequately prepare. So even just a quick update of what's going on would be great. Can we hear about the community health report, maybe from David? David,
you there? I don't
right.
think he's on.
Okay, we can start with the environmental health report. How's that? If you have anything, if you don't, you can.
I'm here. Sorry, I had an issue with my phone.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll start with David.
Thanks, Casey. Appreciate it. Yep, I can give a brief COVID update, which is currently we've had a cumulative 342 confirmed cases of COVID. We have 68 probable cases. We've had less than 5 new cases in the last 14 days. Right now, our percent positivity, which means the people going for COVID tests, the percentage of those people that have a positive COVID test is under 1%. It's 0.33%. Compared with the state average is 1.07%. And the percent positivity average for Middlesex County is 0.85%.
Thank you, David. I have a question about percent positivity and the denominator in that calculation. So for one, I have to be tested twice a week at work. So am I recorded as twice a week? Is that one person or just two tests? I'm just asking because I think the denominator gets larger as more and more people are tested more frequently.
Yep. Yep, that's right. So it's the number of tests. The state has their daily incidence rate per 100,000. So Lexington, we have about 33,000 people. Right now, our daily incidence rate is 0.8 out of 100,000.
That's
For
the
the
case,
state
that's
average,
the case rate, right?
that's the case rate, yes.
Okay, I'm actually asking about the percent positivity.
Okay, so my response was that it's the number of tests, not the number of people. So you're right, as testing increase, the denominator will increase.
Okay, so that sort of, I don't want to say artificially decreases the percent positivity, but it is going to affect the way those numbers look. So we've been asking for a daily positivity rate, right? Because that would allow us to take a look over time. And that's a number that's going to be important for schools, not the positivity, you know, over a number of, over a week, for example. That's not your problem. It is just something that I think the state is being asked to address. Okay. Anybody else have any questions of David? Should we move on? David, I did have a question about the posting of state information about case rates, about all of this, how we will proceed moving forward, whose responsibility will that be? Do you need assistance in getting that done?
I'm going to continue to monitor the Mass.gov website as I always do, and we'll continue to work with everyone.
No, I need to know, but I'm asking specifically the work that Carrie, the data that Carrie had posted weekly, who will be posting that now? And if you need help getting that done, let us know.
Okay. I'm going to try my best. I think I can do that. And I will certainly let you know if I am unable to.
Okay, and the reason for that is we get a lot of questions from a lot of residents about where are those data. So we just need to make sure that those data can be made available. And again, you've got to be able to say, I can't get to that because I've got all this other stuff to do, and we'll figure out how to get those data posted.
I appreciate that, and I'll certainly, if it looks like it's going in that direction, I will certainly let everyone know as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the environmental health report. Casey?
Hello. Yeah, we've started doing routine food inspections. Yeah, yep. We've done about 32, low 30s. You know, myself, Alicia started, you know, doing some inspections, and I believe Crystal is just recently started doing some inspections on odd hours. So, you know, our goal is to have, I mean, it is already the second half of the year, is to have all the businesses inspected at least once through the year. You know, maybe even twice in some cases, because some were inspected in January and February, I believe. But that's the primary goal. And there's about 150 places, food permits. Still working a little bit by bit, trying to get them all permitted. I'm up to 75 places, food permits that are permitted. It's hard to gauge exactly. There's probably about 10 or so out there. Most places are open at this point, but there's a few out there, like some of the office parks, they've decided not to open for whatever reason, like the catering companies. A few smaller businesses here and there may have not opened, but the majority of the most part are out there. For the summer, we inspected we permitted 21 pools. Two of the indoors, there's two indoor pools, the Hayden Recreation Center and the Boston Sports Clubs, but they're only very low capacity, and they're going to be, one of them always has lifeguards anyway, and the Boston Sports Club, they're only opening with lifeguards on a limited capacity, you know, far less than the 40%, bathing load that the state requires. They're kind of letting them in little cohorts, and they're they're signing in who goes swimming and what have you. So there's 21 in total for this year. The camps, there's only a handful of camps, but they've been permitted, including the Recreation SOAR camp, which is SOAR is an acronym. And as far as the complaints, they kind of come in spurts. We've had about 20, maybe a little more, because I didn't really start officially documenting until maybe June. COVID complaints, especially in May, things were just kind of starting up anyway. So we have about roughly 20 complaints we've logged in as far as people, I went to this business and I didn't see the masks, or I was concerned about it. It was very crowded. Those are kind of tricky. I mean, they're kind of a spot thing. They go in a particularly bad moment or an employee. So there hasn't really been much need to act per se, other than just reminding them and educating them and, and what have you. Your typical normal nuisance complaints. I had I would call it a housing, but it's really more of just ordered someone to clean up their property a little bit near downtown, and they did with no issues. I mean, it's technically not really a housing complaint, but you can use the same housing forms with the same language for the general nuisance and property code in the state sanitary code. So that's kind of about it. Yeah, I just wrote those notes down, just looking over our Excel sheets. So I had that prepared for today.
Great, thank you. So in terms of your reports, your inspectional reports, when we get back to business, it would be great to see the write-ups of the inspections as we previously had seen them. Since, as you know, those reports are legal documents. And should somebody come knocking on the door looking for them, they can see them.
Yeah.
And I've forgotten, did we migrate to an electronic system, or are we still on the paper system?
We're still using the paper. There's been a lot of, the permit itself needed a bit of tweaking in this, actually when I started and really dug down trying to reach out and permit the summer businesses and just renewing. There's still a little bit of tweaking here and there. I'd rather, I believe the system has the ability to do that with the pads and what have you, but I'd rather deal with, I got some bigger fish to fry, I guess, at this point before I get into that. But yeah, it has the ability, and it is nice. It's just all in the permit system. It's a great system. It just, like anything, it's got to be tweaked and worked on to kind of to make it so it can flow better. Like, I definitely had some headaches early on, and it's not the permit's fault. It's just a one size fits all that needed to be tweaked. And so a lot of that was worked on. So we'll get there. But yeah, everything is in paper. We're storing it on the drive, and we keep the hard copies. Usually when we get requests from the public, it's usually for a specific place. And a lot of times it's for, I think we had one there for companies like Ecolab, and I think they do it for research purposes. It's actually kind of annoying, but that's what they do. They go, we want all your McDonald's. They must have got a client, and they want to know what they're being written up about,
Well, so.
And they're allowed to, they request the documents and we provide them,
Right, that's great. So it would be great, again, for next meeting, if we could have at least access to the spreadsheets that are documenting what you're doing.
Okay.
Since at the end of the day, right, decisions are made about what are next steps when you've got a facility, an establishment that is having issues.
Yeah.
I think that process was started back with Jerry Cody, and it was very effective, I think, in terms of identifying problem cases.
Yeah, it's usually common for health departments to have like a monthly report and any issues that come up, kind of a nice, clean.
That'd be great.
This is what we did. I mean, but I want to be careful about what information about specifics of the business per se, but we can, if there was any issues.
But wait a minute, but all the inspections, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, are public.
Yeah, I guess they're public. I'm just throwing that out there. I didn't know.
Those are public documents.
Yeah. Well, either way, we can still make a, present a monthly report with all what we've done for inspections and what have you.
Okay, well, we'll start with that. Thank you. And actually, at some point, who knows, there may be somebody who decides, let's do what Cambridge and Boston do with, making, available information about how the establishments are doing with their inspections. And then we would really have to make sure we're well documented.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that's coming down the pike. More and more data are going to be public. So especially when it's already public, or should be. All right. Casey, do you have anything else that you want to share?
Nope. That's kind of a quick summary of, at least on the inspectional side.
Great.
That's a quick summary.
Do you have information about the air quality status in the schools? Is that coming through you?
No, I haven't received anything regarding that.
Okay, because that was something that was on the review list, and I don't know if it's possible for you to get that information, to know where the consultant stands with meeting the air quality guidelines for the schools.
Okay.
Are you able to follow up with that?
I can dig around and see who the contacts. I am second day on this, so some of the behind the scenes stuff I definitely would have to be caught up on. But sure, I got to get some contacts going anyway, so I'll reach out to the schools.
Right, I think at the end of the day, the question is: so is the board going to approve or review the final documents for the return to school with regard to indoor air quality? And we can't know that unless we know that.
A question,
So,
Wendy?
yes, Jay.
Doesn't it also apply to the public buildings also as they're reopening?
It's my understanding that those are two separate contracts.
Okay.
And that we were very involved in the schools, and that we never were involved. We never got the information that we requested for the town buildings.
Could somebody email the town manager and get us the help to get us those reports?
Sure, we can do that.
You might even be on the call.
Yes.
Hint.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Thank you very much, Casey.
Oh, no problem.
And Alicia, welcome. And I don't know if you want to share anything. I don't know that the board has met you. So if you could introduce yourself formally.
Sure, hold on one moment.
Okay.
So, hello everyone, my name's Alicia. I started 3 weeks ago, entering my 4th week here in Lexington. I've done about 15 food inspections so far, answered a lot of COVID related questions and just in general questions in the office. Everything's going good so far.
Great, well, welcome. And if you need anything, let us know. Mm-hmm. It's good that you're with Casey now to help him out there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, I do want to, so thank you. Casey, actually, if in addition to the schools, we could get access to the municipal building information, that would be great. I think it's public. I think that too is public, right? I mean, if the town writes a contract for somebody to do something as residents, I think it should be available. So both of those, the air quality air quality reports would be great.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on. I don't know. We have emergency preparedness update, but only if David is prepared to say something about it, about the flu clinic.
Yep, so we're planning 2 flu clinics this year, October 7th for seniors, October 31st for families. The pre-registration opened for the senior clinic today, and we reached our capacity. We're referring individuals to pharmacies, walk-in clinics, their private physicians. CDC has mentioned that there's going to be more flu vaccine available than in previous years, and we know that it's going to be important for people to get as we deal with COVID as well.
Great.
We've got a great response from the MRC in terms of people volunteering to help out, and we've had great cooperation from the other town departments in terms of being able to help as we try this new drive-through method.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay. And let us know if you need anything from us on that.
Great.
Okay. Does anybody on the board have any questions for David or Casey or Alicia at this point? Sue.
I had a question for David about the EDS plan, but it may be too soon in your tenure to ask that. So you can let me know.
Yep, we did have Robin Chappelle, previous health director, work on that EDS plan. Her contract with the town has ended, but she has provided us with several updates to the EDS plan, and we're currently reviewing them.
Yeah, we just literally got her final product maybe, late last week on our last day. But yeah, we have those. I mean, I've looked at those in previous positions where, you know, the same idea with the setups and what have you. So we'll definitely look at those. I know one thing, I'll be stepping in for a lot of the regional meetings. Usually each town has a representative, and I believe Terry was doing that for Lexington, and I'll contact them and have them email me or invite me or David, and we'll sit on those meetings.
Okay. So when
region 4, is it 4A? 4A? Yeah.
Okay, great. Good. So in terms of the EDS, Sue is very well informed, shall I say, right? Like your day job is now EDS for people with disabilities. So please, let's make sure that Sue gets involved where she needs to get involved so we don't have an embarrassment. Okay. If there are no additional questions or issues or comments, I'd like to move on to the new business, which is systemic racism as a public health crisis. Oh, it's good to see you, Mona. I'm going to turn this over to Mona Roy, who is, I hope I get this right, Mona, chairperson of the Lexington Human Rights Commission.
And still committee. We're getting there.
Yes, and she is going to share what she has for us. I provided previously a statement that's from the Human Rights Committee, preamble and resolution to declaring racism as a public health crisis. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mona.
Yes, so I don't have any fancy presentation per se. You have the document in front of you. And I just wanted to sort of bring you up to date on why, our thinking process and what we would hope that you would be able to do. So the Lexington Human Rights Committee declared racism to be a public health crisis with the understanding that we would present this to you for further consideration. So you have this resolution in front of you. We got some feedback from some community, also from Wendy herself. And one of the reason that we did this declaration was to get the process started and also to have a work group. So why did we make such a declaration? As it says right up front, declaring racism to be a public health crisis offers a clear path to intentionally acknowledging and addressing disparities and inequities. Adopting a formal resolution can catalyze and authorize data analysis, policy analysis to prevent unintentional injustices and implementation of policies and actions to dismantle or course correct problematic systems. So what we were asking of the Board of Health, please excuse me, extraneous noise. We're asking the Board of Health to join us in this declaration that racism is a public health crisis in Lexington. And so that's our request. And then for us, the next steps would be, as I alluded to, we have formed a work group to look at Lexington specific data on health outcomes. For example, I think recently we saw that for the COVID stats, African Americans, I believe, make up 6% of the cases, but are about 1 to 1.5% of the population in Lexington. We're also looking, when we talk about public health, we're including not just physical health, but mental health, because there's certainly well-documented disparities in discipline and other outcomes at the schools for African Americans. And we've also just gotten general feedback and concerns from the community. So we are looking to look into this data and to see, what we find, and then make recommendations and look at next steps. For the work group, Tanya Gisolfi McCready, who's our vice chair, and community member Deborah Strad are co-chairing this group. They will reach out to individual Board of Health members for input as they set parameters for the group's goals, activities, and membership. And we would appreciate your feedback if you have any recommendations for racial equity health topics, data sources, or educational activities, or people whom you think should serve on the working group. Feel free to contact either Tanya or Deborah through the Lexington Human Rights Committee. And we anticipate that an organizational meeting will happen in September. So there's been interest from the community, but we would like your feedback, of course, and your support in also moving forward on this. So I don't know if you're in a position tonight to make the declaration, but, or what you would do, your next steps would be.
Right. So I think what I will do first is open it up for questions by members of the board. I'll just go around. If anybody has questions either about the actual declaration or the board's adoption or sign on, I guess, I think it's an adoption. I don't know, of the resolution. This would be the time to ask. If we need more time for either discussion or for the rest of the board to find out more information, let's figure that out now. So we'll start with Mr. Flynn.
Well, thank you. I mean, very important topic. My first thought is that it's sort of maybe a little bit, you're forming a working group that has more, trying to evolve more specific issues, and I assume action items and that type of thing. Some part of me says is that that might need to get going first in terms of being able to understand, really where you're going, what you're trying to do, something that, and the specific action items, and then we'd have a better place to adopting a resolution in support of them. I'm always saying at the moment that the general principle you presented, I have no objection to. In fact, I fully support. But my thought is it maybe a little bit too early, maybe need a little more focus. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Jay, when you say you need more focus, what does that mean? Are you looking for evidence? Are you looking for?
No. I think that, well, as I read the resolution, that you want to form a working group.
Yeah.
I presume the working group is going to take this issue and kind of start to look at the process of what you want to do. You need the working group to try to decide that, but you're going to take specific actions. Bring the groups. You're going to an informational process or something. And it's in the context of supporting those specifics that I think that would be more beneficial. Other than simply this, I don't see any reason why we can't just simply adopt the principle, but it's more of the case of when we start to formulate what kind of a real role we might be able to play in going forward, and then adopting it on the board as opposed to this generalization.
Ms. Roy, do you want to address? You're muted. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I kept myself muted while I wasn't speaking. So I think from my perspective, and this is, every board is different, but I think it's important, unless there's some concerns about the language itself, to make that statement that we recognize, we inherently recognize that there are racial disparities, and this is something we need to look at. Even the smallest evidence that I just happen to mention is disparity in and of itself. So I think I think I'm hearing sort of a chicken and egg thing, but in my mind, it's important to make the declaration, which shows that the Board of Health acknowledges that this is an issue and it's worth looking into. We recognize that you have a lot going on. I don't want to add to your plate, certainly, but it would be nice to have that declaration. We will do the work regardless, but I think it's important for the Board of Health, and other boards. I mean, I think there's something on the town meeting end where they've already, made, similar statements, not so detailed, but similar statements about inequities, and then probably, other boards and committees will look. But I think for the Board of Health, it would be very helpful and supportive to have this declaration first, even if it sounds like, well, what are you asking? We're actually just asking for you to make the declaration. And then as we get into the data, as we bring you the information, that's a discussion. We can only make recommendations. We can't ask the Board of Health. We can't ask anyone to do anything. These are things, the data will come, recommendations will come, and then the Board of Health, or maybe the schools, depending on what we find, right? The town, the human services, whatever it is, those recommendations will be referred back to the specific groups. But it would be I think it's important, particularly in a town like Lexington, where we have diversity and different kinds of diversity. I think it's important to acknowledge that race can play a role in public health and, or just in health outcomes and inequity. So that was my perspective. I mean, I would defer to Wendy to pick up on that.
So I'm happy to do that. I think that, we can, this is a really important issue. The data are out there for disparities in health on a racial basis, and I think that, and diversity basis. And I think that is a really important perspective to recognize. When it comes to health, that's our purview, right? And if we look at health, if we just look at COVID, who are the people that are hit hardest? Who are the people with the underlying health conditions? And that is across the board, whether it's Chelsea, Massachusetts, right, or it's Lexington, Massachusetts, that needs to be recognized. And so, Jay, I think what it is about recognizing, recognizing and declaring. I mean, the board can, we can declare this, right? And, we really don't have the power to do anything except recommend, sort of on a basis of policy, we can start collecting these data, or somebody else could start collecting those data, right? And there are to the best of my knowledge, there are other boards in the state that have done this. I know that Chelsea has done this, even though they actually didn't ask their Board of Health, but that's another story. And numbers of others have done it as well. I think, and I'm not going to diminish this, it's, we serve on other committees and other boards as representatives. One thing might be is that because, we all have so much time, that we are sort of a representative to this other board or something like that. But, I think that, Mona, actually, I don't want to misspeak. Other towns have done this, other towns and communities besides Chelsea and Somerville?
Well, we've certainly had we've had whole towns. I mean, we know the big one, San Francisco. I mean, actually the whole, the city council, it's this declaration of racism as a public health crisis is not something that's, it's happening everywhere. I can't even.
And I guess the question is in Massachusetts.
In Massachusetts, yes, we had, besides Chelsea, I was trying to think off the top of my head. I should really refer to my work group here. They might know better than I do. They're also on this call if you want to ask them. But there have been other towns that have declared racism as a public health crisis. I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head who that was. But so there are other towns that have already done it. And we started the process to make that declaration. You know, we wanted to be helpful by starting the process so that you wouldn't have to, you know, go through the work, go do the language, that sort of thing. But I think it would be very, very helpful to, I think it would be very helpful for the Board of Health to join in this declaration, because I think it gives it some weight to acknowledge that this is an issue. And it's particularly in this town where we have racial diversity, which is, you know, that it matters, I'm not at all suggesting that any of you think it doesn't matter, but I think a declaration like that gives it some weight.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Dr. Perlmutter. Questions, comments?
Yes, well, I have a partial question, I think. You mentioned, Mona, about collecting the outcome data to document and show people how this is a public health emergency. How about access to health care? Is that also going to be looked at in looking at racial issues?
I think, and so nothing is off, everything is on the table. I think and I'm happy to also, if I believe the parameters of the work and how it will be done in order will be determined by the work group co-chairs, who are the Vice Chair of the Human Rights Committee, Tanya Gisolfi, and also Deborah Stroud, who is a community member and very much invested in this issue. So they're absolutely, if you want to ask them directly, I believe they're on.
I certainly would suggest that, because access to healthcare is part of the secondary effect of the outcomes.
Yes, absolutely.
There is no question that there is a variation based upon racial lines on access to healthcare. Maybe less in Lexington, maybe not. I don't know. I don't want to speak out of turn. Certainly in the city, it's definitely a difference. In any case, I also want to voice my support, and I'm willing to declare my support for the declaration.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Sue Wolf-Fordham.
Sure. Well, working on health equity issues is my daily bread and butter. So I can say that the data from the emergency planning and response field shows institutional bias and shows access problems and equity problems. So to me, this is a very important issue as well. I will say I read the declaration, and there was a statement that I had a question about. So I did a little research on my own to make sure that I understood it, and I am ready to vote in support of it.
Okay, Dr. Geller, questions, comments?
I'll keep it simple. I fully support this initiative, and I think it's wonderful. And also to comment on the background where she's presenting from is where I proposed to my wife under the dome down on the wharf. So,
David. Okay, I think that Deborah Stroud posted a comment, but I can't now seem to find it. Can people read it?
This is Debbie, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't.
All I posted was that Boston declared recently, Somerville declared in June, which was actually what got me thinking about it originally, and Pittsfield also declared. And I believe Chicopee did too. Yep, Chicopee did also in June. So there's multiple. I don't know the rest of them off the top of my head now, but I wanted to let you know those.
Okay, thank you.
It was Pittsfield that I couldn't remember. But yeah, Boston, of course, we all saw that on TV. Boston already did, but I think even some of the smaller towns are, so I think it's important.
Okay. should we, I don't have any questions. Ms. Roy and I did communicate about this. There are pieces of this that I feel very strongly about and that I actually work on, right, which is environmental justice and injustice. We actually have never examined that in the context of Lexington. And so I too would support this. I think what it does is it gives us an opportunity, as many of us have been doing it in our workplaces, about learning about racism and anti-racism and how to be, really how to stand for the things that the Human Rights Committee stands for. And this starts at a place of health as has been called a human right. And I'm not going to babble. It's been a long day. I'm going to open it up to anybody else. We can go around again if anybody has any other comments or questions. Jay? You're muted. Oh.
I'm in fully support. I'm just sitting here trying to figure out what the motion should be.
Okay. Well, you're the motion guy, so figure it out.
Let me talk out loud. I think it's basically just the Board of Health supports the resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis as stated by the Human Rights Committee.
I think that's correct.
I think it is it adopt. I think a motion to adopt.
Yep.
A motion to not just to support, but to adopt.
Yes.
So in other words, you've declared it too.
Okay. So Jay, do you want to repeat make a motion to adopt?
The Board of Health adopts the resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis as defined by the Human Rights Committee.
Okay. Seconded by Dr. Perlmutter, and then we'll take a roll call vote. Ms. Sue Wolfordham?
I'm voting in favor.
Dr. Geller?
Yes.
Dr. Perlmutter?
Yes.
Mr. Flynn?
Yes.
Wendy Heiger-Bernays? Yes. Decision is unanimous. We would like to, I think I'll speak for the others, but like to understand sort of your next steps in terms of our work. We are supportive, and it would be good actually if we could have an update sort of as you move forward. I don't know when our next meeting is, but we'll figure that out.
So Deborah Stroud, Debbie, you're still on. Do you want to speak to that? Because she and I think Mr. Zolfi couldn't make it for some reason, but Debbie is one of the co-chairs of the work group. So in however form you want the updates, I'm sure she can provide them.
Great.
Sure. Happy to come when there's an update to give. And we'll, like Mona said, we'll have an organizational meeting based on the people who've already said that they're interested sometime within this month. And also we'll contact, maybe through Wendy, but we'll contact this board to check in on topics and important sources of data that you can point towards.
Great, thank you. I did want to make one comment, and we started, Mona, you and I and Deborah and Tanya, we started actually with a public health emergency, and we moved from a public health emergency because an emergency actually has different implications. We have a COVID emergency, right? And we need to deal with that. And there are other emergencies. This is a crisis that needs to be addressed in the not longer term, recognized now and move towards solutions. So the wording is different than Boston, I think, or than some other communities.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you
Um,
so much for your time. We really appreciate it and your support of this work.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay. Is there any other in business or anything that anyone else wants to raise? Dr. Perlmutter?
Meeting times. I know
Yes.
this month was unusual.
Hold on a second. Could I interrupt something?
Of course.
I think did we skip number 3, or do I have a different version? Safety plans, recreation, and the library, are they here, or am I reading the wrong one? Or
No, you're reading the right one.
I didn't know if they wanted to speak. Are they planning on speaking, or are they here? I have someone I think we have someone from the library and Melissa regarding the fall programs. Or are you all set, Melissa? Hello?
I'm here. Oh, you can still hear me. Okay, yeah, no, I'm here. And Peter Coleman has been on the line since the beginning of the meeting. He's the one presenting an update on our fall programs. And I do know that the library director, Corin Stembridge, has also been on the line since the beginning of the meeting, waiting for our updates. So we're here if you want to hear our updates.
Okay, go right ahead. I'm sorry about that. I was not sure that I did not know that you were on the line to present, nor that the library person was on the line. I just wanted to make sure. I was trying to make it smoother for Casey and for David, since they just got their new assignments. So pardon me, please. Melissa, go right ahead, and then we'll turn it right over to the Library Restoration Service.
Okay, so if it's okay, Wendy, Peter Coleman is presenting tonight's update. He had provided a memo with some backup information that we hope made it to you last week.
No, we did not get it.
Okay, so I'm not sure, Peter, if you can see where he is to unmute him, or if he needs to raise his hand. I'm not sure how it works when you're not on the panel. Oh, great.
I've been unmuted. You can hear me, correct?
Fantastic.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Coleman. I'm the Assistant Director of Recreation. Thank you for having us tonight. I just want to give you all a brief update on how our summer went, and then also a look ahead to what we're preparing for the fall season. Before I do that, I was on at the beginning of the meeting. So Dr. Perlmutter, I have to say that Lyman, Maine was my hometown. So it's a small world, small little town of 3,000 people. So not many people have heard of Lyman, Maine before. So certainly appreciated that. So
your former fire chief lives here now.
Yes, Chief Wilson, he does as well. So
Do you know why he knows him?
Son-in-law.
It's his son-in-law.
Okay.
But it has nothing to do with why he lives here. They found this spot and they love it.
Yes, so small world. So but yes, so just wanted to, like I said, give you a quick overview of the summer. Obviously our staff has worked extensively and collaboratively with the health department staff every step of the way throughout the summertime. And we did pull off a successful summer in the middle of a pandemic. We did have a handful of in-person programs that we ran this summer, and we had approximately 320 participants and 25 staff members attend our 4 weeks programming. And we made it through the summer without any confirmed or presumed COVID cases. So obviously, summer camp did look different with being 6 feet apart and having everyone wear a mask, but it can be done, and that certainly just is due to the diligence of the participants, of our staff, and once again just the collaboration we've had with the health department staff, specifically Casey and Robin Chappelle has been instrumental. Without all of their support, none of this would have been possible. So just wanted to thank them, and once again, given that we've been able to have successful programs this summer, we are hoping to provide the community with more programming opportunities this fall. So the majority of the programs, they are going to be outdoors or virtual, but we are looking to offer a few indoor programs this fall as well. And we typically have youth and adult programming at a whole assortment of schools, whether it be the Clark Middle School, the high school, but really looking at our key core services for the fall. We are focused on offering programs at the Diamond Middle School and the Esterbrook School. So really targeting those two gyms. Our department staff, we've been in contact with Lexington Public Schools. Melissa has spoken with Dr. Hackett and David Coelho directly. We've also been in communication with the health department staff about our requests, and the facilities department, Mike Cronin and his staff as well. So we certainly have been, engaging in the dialogue. I know everyone's time these last several months has been focused on return to school. And now that with those plans in place, we're certainly, having those conversations about what recreation programming might look like at the schools going forward. So we would certainly, have the same safety protocols and procedures in place like we did for our summer programs. We'll have our operational plan in place, as well as our isolation and discharge policy. And we will continue with our daily health and wellness screening checklist. So all participants and all staff must complete the checklist of about a dozen questions prior to arrival at the program each day. So we would continue with that process because we found that to be very successful throughout the summertime. So we're looking to continue that as well. And then one other item for consideration is just a reopening of the public bathrooms throughout town. With schools reopening and high school and middle school athletics taking place this fall, as well as other community groups looking to get back out on the field, I'm just looking to reopen the 3 public restrooms that our department oversees directly. The center, the Park Drive bathrooms at the Center Recreation Complex, the Lincoln Park restrooms, and then also the restrooms at the community center. So that was really, like I said, a brief overview saying that yes, we made it through the summer successfully, and we are looking to continue that momentum here going forward into the fall season as well.
Thank you very much, Peter. So I do have a question, actually, and that is, you report that the self-assessment worked well. How do you know that?
So we had the option where people could fill out the form and bring the form with them. We also, through our staff, developed an electronic version, a Google form. So when each morning at 6 o'clock, parents would receive, that day's health form. They would complete it out. Then our staff, upon arrival, so we would do a live drop off. During that process, our staff on site would, use a tablet to review, okay, this individual, parents or guardians did complete the form on this day, and we're able to see the results that of the form, that the person had a temperature under 100 degrees and then answered no to all of the symptomatic questions that are connected to COVID-19. So that was, other colleagues throughout the state have developed that type of protocol. So we, certainly thought that would be worthwhile and something we wanted to implement. So based on, I think that, and once again, if anyone had said, yes, my son or daughter has a fever over 100 or is showing signs of a sore throat or coughing or gastrointestinal issues, anything like that, we said, okay, you came to the program, but unfortunately you can't stay. You have to go home for today until you don't have those symptoms going forward. So that was, I think, certainly a great preventative measure and people were very, understanding and mindful of it, didn't get any pushback as far as why do we have to do this every day for 10 days or for 20 days. So it was really, really a great protocol to put into place.
So the self-assessment, the assessment that you're using for the self-assessment is that people were compliant in filling it out.
That is correct. And if anyone was not compliant, they had to complete the form, either a paper copy or log onto their cell phone, complete it prior to their child being dropped off.
Okay. Thank you. And you mentioned the bathrooms. So you're working with Casey and Alicia or David on infection control and disinfection bathrooms. Is that what's up now is that
yes.
what I heard you say?
Yes, yeah. It's something for consideration. Up until now, all the public restrooms have remained closed.
Right.
But once again, if, like I said, high school or middle school athletics, if the various youth and adult leagues are going to really ramp up and resume play, then at some of our larger facilities like the Center Recreation Complex and Lincoln Park, instead of, and once again, rather than throwing an unsightly portable bathroom up there, we really looking to get those, permanent restroom facilities online for the fall season.
Okay, so that will be with Casey and with facilities because of all the need for disinfection, right, and tracking. So, great, yes. Thank you.
And if I can add just to that with the bathrooms, the visitor center recently opened, so there are some protocols in terms of the public restrooms. So in terms of our update to the Board of Health and with working with the health staff, obviously what we would do is with DPF then identify the hours of operation so that, you know, because typically the outdoor restrooms at Center and Lincoln are open dawn to dusk. And that's not something that we're going to be doing in reopening. And the community center restrooms are within the building and are locked. So we have control over that with staff, and we have custodians in that building at all times. So there's a few more controls that we'll put in place compared to in the past where those bathrooms just kind of are open to any park user. This would be more specific based on the permitted use.
Great, thank you. Okay, and last but not least, and I apologize to Corinne Stembridge.
Oh, no worries at all.
I'm sorry.
I got such good information listening into this meeting. You know, I confess as the library director, I don't have much overlap with the Board of Health. In fact, COVID is kind of the first moment where my job has kind of veered into public safety in a very dramatic way. So I guess I have some bad news in that I'm one of those offending people who is here with a question for you that I want some guidance on. My board, the library board, will be meeting tomorrow night to discuss moving forward on our phase 3 reopening piece of our plan. But the date that I'm proposing for reopening is far enough in the future that I think you would have plenty of time to give me guidance, even if it isn't for tomorrow night. So that's the good piece.
That's good.
The library has really held back and been very cautious. We have a very challenging situation in that we're a really large library. I mean, we're the 5th busiest library in Massachusetts. And we have a big facility, but in order to bring staff back into the building to work, we've had to spread staff into public areas. And so, and that has kept, you know, our workforce separated, which is great. But as we look toward providing what we're referring to as a grab and go or a grocery store model where people can come in the building, browse for books, check them out and leave, we're having to pull staff back into other spaces to make it safe for the public to come back in the building. So we've held off as long as we feel like we can or should, or at least I have held off. And I will be recommending that the library board approve moving to phase 3, which again is very much like a grocery store. There would be no chairs in the building, nothing people can do other than come in, look for books, chat with a librarian about resource materials they might need, and then leave. The big question I have for you is, first of all, is there more about that plan that you need to know about specifically that I should provide for you ahead of any potential reopening? But I do have one very specific question, and it is about conflicting guidance that we're getting about quarantining library materials.
You mean like 3 days?
Yeah, so the governor's guidance is 24 hours. And the library world, the museum and libraries have contracted with Battelle to do testing on library materials. So they've been issuing studies, and the most recent study, which actually reviewed materials that are stacked, which is, you know, we don't spread our materials out at the library, they're all stacked together. So the most recent set of findings found traces of live virus after 6 days.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so
send that study along.
I can do that. I will.
That would be great, and send it please to the health office.
I will. I've shared it with Casey, but there's so much change in the last week or so that I think we're still kind of getting the flow of information down. And I guess the concern that I have is that, you know, I'm not a scientist, I'm a library director. And most of the information I'm reading is that COVID is not actively transmitted from surfaces. It's transmitted from aerosol. And I'm not overly concerned that members of the public would contract COVID from touching a library book. But I am concerned with the staff who touch hundreds of them. And so right now we're quarantining for 96 hours. We've been increasing our quarantine as these studies have indicated we should increase it. But to add 2 more days takes even more public footprint for storage of materials in our building at a time when we're trying to make it safe for the public. So I guess my question is, how worried do I need to be about this?
So let me suggest that you share the report.
Okay.
That we ask some others who are experts in this area, and that we get back to you.
Great.
And Casey does his work perhaps at the state to see what the consensus is there. And have you considered, so you've got the staff potential exposure to virus, but then the question of patrons coming in, and you've also had to move staff in order to allow patrons. Is there a way perhaps that patrons could order books online and then be notified and then do a patrons scheduled pickup?
They do. Currently, we are offering curbside service. So we're going gangbusters because everyone in Lexington is a big reader. So we have about 250 to 300 appointments a day at this point with materials to be picked up. So this would really change our model to allow patrons into the library. We're looking at no more than 30 patrons at a time, and we have a 62,000 square foot building, so we're way under capacity issues with 30 people, and for no more than 30 minutes at a time. But obviously over the course of a week, if we're fully at capacity with people taking advantage of those opportunities, we're at 1,500 people cycling through the library on a weekly basis.
And you don't know who those people are.
We don't, because by law—
And David is getting nervous now.
Yeah, we can't do contact tracing, and we can't limit access to Lexington residents.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So we literally become like a grocery store.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your other colleagues at I assume that Cambridge has an active library, that many have active and large libraries.
Absolutely. And libraries are all over the map.
Yeah.
So I was at Wellesley last week. They're open with a very similar model to what we're proposing, and it appears to be going well so far. But like a model like this works until it doesn't. Right.
Right. So without putting anybody on the spot here, as you've heard, it's been a long evening and a long day. Perhaps we can do a little bit of digging on our end, and the health staff can do on their end and talk to their others and come back and see if we can come up with a health protective but reasonable solution to 2 problems, and we'll get to Sue. One is what do we do about lots of people coming in, right? And the other is what to do about the books.
Right.
Sue.
So I just wondered about the ventilation in the library.
Oh,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I apologize. It's a huge concern of mine. My understanding from talking with the head of public facilities is that the town buildings are going to be going through the similar process that the schools went, building by building, space by space kind of process. I think I'm accurate in that regard.
So Corinne, this is great. We're bringing this up because this was the contract that we referred to earlier, to really understand what the ventilation is like in the town buildings. And that should be examined, similarly to the buildings, the school buildings.
Yes, and I apologize. That probably wasn't my story to tell, but I'm very concerned about the ventilation in the library, so that was something I advocated for.
Thank you. We are as well, because you've put your finger on the fact that this is an aerosolized virus, and that is the mode of by which people are exposed. So we need to understand ventilation in the library. So.
Do you
go ahead? Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
I'm just having a.
Right,
I'm tired.
Exhausted, but I'm also a big library patron. So, is your thought that you would wait until after the ventilation report to make your decision about when to reopen? You're just taking steps now to get the plan in place. Am I right on that?
Yes, I think it's reasonable. The library trustees, and just a point of interesting information, the library trustees are the select board, the school committee, and the settled clergy. So we have a fabulous board of people who have talked with you in other venues.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I had no clue. We've learned a lot this evening.
Yes, well, the founder of the library was very strategic and brilliant in her wishes about who would be the trustees for the library. But they've already determined that we would not be opening until October at the earliest. And I think the date is still be determined. I think the other thing they'll be discussing is, should we tie our decision to the schools? So if the schools decide that they cannot have kids in the building, then, form follows function, and we shouldn't have people in the library either, kind of. So we're really discussing high conceptual stuff and not specific logistical stuff tomorrow.
Okay, great. No, it's really good that you were here. And again, I apologize for skipping over and making you and Melissa and Peter listen. But thank you, Casey. So if we could follow up with the building ventilation plans for the town buildings, like we need to with the school buildings, that would be one piece of this. And then there are the other three pieces because of the tie-in with schools and decisions there, the books and the patrons. Oh my gosh. A lot on your plate. So we will work with you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you. Okay, and thank you, Casey, for waking us up here. Okay, I think I'll go around. Anybody have anything else? Sue?
No.
Jay?
No.
Dr. Perlmutter?
Yes. As we move forward planning for future meetings, and I realize there are lots of issues on the table, not the least of which is a pandemic. I would like to request that we not meet at 6, which is a very inconvenient time for me personally. And I would accept 6:30. I know we don't want to go late, which we do anyway. We feel badly for the staff because they work so hard all day, and then to keep them at a meeting late into the evening is unfortunate. So that's just my personal request. We don't have to make a decision tonight. Let's think about it and discuss it with the next meeting.
That's fine. It's okay. Okay, so shall we work out another meeting via conversation, or do we have, let's just do this. Do Tuesday nights generally work?
Yeah, I can do Tuesday.
And Jay?
Anytime Tuesday is good.
Okay. So, and I think the staff has a long day. Is Tuesday your long day? Casey, you're muted.
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. So let's look at you know, a month. We go a month, please. Unless some emergency comes up. I don't want to call it an emergency. Unless we need to meet earlier, but we will always give at least a week notice. Make sure the staff is able to get things in order and we can meet. Not starting before 6:30. Okay. Do I have a motion, please, to adjourn this meeting?
Adjourn.
Okay. Second.
Second.
Sue will Fordham seconds. Mr. Flynn.
Yes.
Sue will Fordham.
Yes.
Dr. Perlmutter.
Yes.
Wendy Heiger-Bernays. Yes. David Geller already left. So let's call this meeting adjourned at 8:34 on September 8th. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.